The phone lit up with a single line that felt more violent than any knife wound could be. "Good luck without me." The words stared back like a final verdict, typed out cold and detached, stripped of the warmth that once defined them. She didn't drop the phone, didn't scream, didn't even blink for too long. Instead, she let the silence between heartbeats expand until it steadied her breathing. He thought this was the end. He was wrong. Her hand tightened around the phone, not in desperation but in control. Tears did not come. Begging never crossed her mind. He expected her to crumble, to send a flurry of messages asking why, pleading for another chance. But she gave him nothing. That emptiness, that refusal to perform the role of the broken lover, became her first weapon. Silence, she realized, could wound sharper than words. Yet as hours turned into days, the thought gnawed at her. His cruelty felt too calculated, too sudden to be only about love gone cold. Why like this? Why now? The questions circled her mind, not with sorrow but with growing suspicion. He wasn't simply walking away. He was hiding something. Another betrayal pulsed beneath the surface, just waiting to be dragged into the light. The more she replayed his words, the more their arrogance betrayed him. That smug little phrase, "good luck without me," reeked of someone who thought he was irreplaceable, untouchable. But arrogance always left cracks. She began noticing the way he had grown distant weeks before. The evasive excuses, the quick smile that didn't reach his eyes. The mask had been slipping all along, but only now did she truly see the man behind it. Her chest no longer ached with loss. It burned with resolve. A vow rose in her like steel being forged in flame. If he thought she would be the fragile girl he could discard, he had miscalculated. His betrayal was not the end of her. It was the birth of something sharper, colder. She would not scream her pain into the void. She would make him choke on the silence he once thought was his weapon. He believed he had ended her story with that careless text. In his mind, she was a closed chapter, a girl left behind while he moved forward, untouched, unchallenged. But while he imagined her fading, she was already sharpening her next move. Every moment of quiet was a blade being honed, every breath a strategy forming. He had no idea that the ending he wrote for her was only the prologue to his downfall, and she would be the author of it. From the outside, she seemed to have it all together. Ambitious, dedicated, and endlessly patient, she moved through life as if every step had been rehearsed. To her colleagues, she was dependable, but never threatening, the type who did the work while others claimed the spotlight. That was her armor. Being underestimated gave her room to observe without drawing attention. What no one noticed was the quiet strength she carried, the kind forged not from loud declarations, but from endurance and restraint. Beneath the polished surface of perfection, she was sharpening edges no one had ever seen. He, on the other hand, was everything she wasn't, or so it seemed. To the world, he wore the mask of charm with effortless ease. His laugh carried through rooms, his confidence filled spaces before he even entered them, and people gravitated toward the warmth he projected. But behind closed doors, the smile vanished, replaced by a cold grip on control. He had mastered the art of dominance disguised as care, twisting concern into command, making her doubt her instincts while convincing her it was love. The man who dazzled the crowd was nothing more than a puppeteer pulling invisible strings. At first, she believed in his version of partnership. He spoke of teamwork, of shared dreams, but slowly his words began to rot. Every decision she made was corrected, every step forward redirected by his hand. What he called guidance was nothing but chains disguised as affection. He weakened her confidence piece by piece, making her question her own strength until dependence felt inevitable. Yet even as his grip tightened, a part of her resisted, storing away each humiliation like a seed waiting for soil. The deception ran deeper than she could have imagined. While she worked tirelessly, building ideas and pushing forward projects, he was already plotting his escape. He presented her efforts as his own, profiting from the sweat she shed while smiling for the cameras as though he were the mastermind. Behind her back, he carved out a future that excluded her entirely, convinced he could abandon her without consequence. His betrayal was hidden under layers of charm, but the cracks were waiting to be exposed. It began with late nights explained away with vague excuses, with words that cut sharper than silence, with a distance he no longer bothered to mask. Patterns emerged, undeniable in their cruelty. The dismissive tone, the sudden coldness, the way he stopped pretending to listen. All of it lined up like evidence laid neatly in front of her. She no longer needed to search for truth. It was unraveling before her eyes. The facade that once held him together was beginning to crumble, and she was the only one watching closely enough to catch every fragment. But she didn't confront him. She didn't rage or demand answers. Instead, she became still, her silence turning into the sharpest form of observation. Every word he spoke, every move he made, she memorized with chilling precision. She pieced together timelines, motives, and opportunities, studying him like a puzzle only she knew how to solve. Her quiet awakening wasn't marked by loud declarations, but by an internal shift. She no longer felt bound to his games. Instead, she was learning how to play her own. Every insult he thought she absorbed, every betrayal he assumed she'd forgotten, became fuel. She carried each one carefully, storing them not as wounds but as weapons. Slowly, she began to weave her plan, never rushing, never exposing the storm building beneath her calm exterior. Her silence masked her preparation. Her stillness disguised her intent. What he mistook for weakness was the careful restraint of someone who knew revenge tasted better when served cold. And so, when he finally walked away, certain he had left her broken, he never noticed the weight of the silence that followed him. He never heard the warning in her calm, never realized that the game he had been playing was no longer his to control. He believed he'd walked away clean, untouched by the destruction he left behind. But what he failed to understand was simple and fatal. Every game has rules, and she never played to lose. It started with whispers she wasn't meant to hear. Muted conversations ended abruptly when she entered the room, and familiar faces looked away a little too quickly. The stories he told her, about late meetings, missed calls, unexplained absences, began to fracture under the weight of small, careless details. Numbers in his accounts didn't align, timelines faltered, and lies layered themselves so thinly that anyone paying attention could peel them back. She had ignored those signs before, trusting him when trust was the only currency she thought she had. But now, as shadows closed in with their hushed warnings, she realized the cracks weren't new. They had always been there, waiting for her to finally see. And once she allowed herself to see, the memories came back sharper than glass. His laughter when she shared her ambitions, mocking them as cute, but never serious. The way he had stepped into rooms she had worked hard to open, stealing the credit while brushing her name aside. Every time she had silenced herself to keep the peace, he had grown bolder, feeding on her patience. What once felt like small sacrifices now revealed themselves as deliberate thefts. Each flashback was no longer a wound. It was a reminder of why he didn't deserve forgiveness. Regret did not weaken her. It sharpened her resolve into something unbreakable. Outwardly, she gave him what he expected, calm indifference. He strutted through his so-called freedom, convinced he had cast her aside like a finished chapter. But beneath her quiet exterior, she was at work. Contracts became her battlefield, fine print her weapon. She studied the paper trail he never imagined she'd notice, learning to navigate loopholes with precision. He was too busy flaunting his victories to see her building a storm in silence, and she let him believe she was broken, because invisibility made her stronger. The proof she needed wasn't hidden. It was sitting in plain sight. Careless text threads, sloppy screenshots, unguarded financial records. He left his arrogance etched into every detail, too certain of his superiority to lock the doors behind him. Investments, once paraded before her as his brilliance, revealed the truth when examined closely. Borrowed ideas, stolen funds, fragile foundations. He thought she'd never look, never question, never notice. But she was looking now, and each discovery slid neatly into the growing arsenal she was preparing. She didn't fight alone. Quietly, she reached out to the people he had dismissed as unworthy of his attention. The overlooked, the underestimated, the ones he had insulted or ignored. Where he saw irrelevance, she saw opportunity. One by one, they became her silent allies, willing to listen, to share, to lend support to the cause of undoing him. Together, they began to stitch a quiet web around him, invisible yet tightening with every passing day. He had built his empire on domination. She was building hers on loyalty, trust, and precision. Through it all, she never lost her composure. Where he expected anger, she gave patience. Where he hoped for collapse, she offered silence. She was meticulous, each step measured, each decision calculated. Her strength was no longer tied to him. It was hers alone, reinforced by discipline and fueled by betrayal. The storm she was crafting wasn't born of chaos, but of strategy, built methodically until every piece fit perfectly into place. As the final pieces settled, the outline of her plan became undeniable to her, but still invisible to him. To the outside world, nothing seemed to have changed. She moved quietly, a shadow in his periphery, never raising suspicion. Yet behind the curtain of her silence, every detail was aligned, every thread pulled taut. The trap wasn't a sudden strike, but a carefully orchestrated collapse, one that would leave him bewildered by how it all unraveled so quickly when, in truth, it had been unraveling all along. And when it finally fell, when his empire crumbled under the weight of his own arrogance, she would not need to shout her victory. Her presence alone would say everything. He had thought he left her powerless, nothing but remnants of a life he'd discarded. What he failed to see was that she was building something greater with the very pieces he dropped. From his ashes, she would rise, not as a survivor of his betrayal, but as the architect of an empire he could never touch. He had always carried himself with an air of superiority, but now his arrogance spilled over into cruelty. At dinners with friends, he would arrive with his new girlfriend clinging to his arm, deliberately leaning across the table to whisper jokes at her expense. Each laugh was loud, sharp, and designed to humiliate. Lies began to circle. Claims that she had begged him to stay, that she had been unfaithful, that she was jealous and unstable. He made a show of mocking her pain, confident the world would take his side. She sat silently through it all, her composure unshaken, storing every word as if each insult were another brick in the fortress she was quietly building. In his arrogance, he forgot the small things, the shared accounts that still carried her name, the property records they had once signed together, the passwords he had never bothered to change. He believed himself untouchable, too clever to be caught. But she watched from the shadows, noting every careless transaction, every receipt that came to her inbox, every careless movement he failed to hide. He thought he had severed her from his world. In truth, he had left the door wide open. She began to prepare without a single outward sign. With quiet patience, she let him spend freely, entertaining his new circle, buying things he couldn't afford, making promises he could never keep. Every step he took toward extravagance was another step closer to ruin. She never interrupted, never warned him, only observed as he dug the hole deeper. To those around them, it looked as though she had accepted her defeat, living in silence while he flaunted his victory. But in her stillness, she was laying the bait, setting a trap so simple he would walk into it blind. The more reckless he became, the more convinced he was of her weakness. To him, her silence meant submission. He paraded his triumph more boldly, smirking across rooms when their paths crossed, leaning into whispers with his girlfriend loud enough for her to hear. He never noticed that she was no longer watching him with pain in her eyes, but calculation. Every risk he took, every careless show of dominance, was another chain binding him tighter. And still, she gave him nothing to fear, allowing him to believe she was broken. While he wasted his energy basking in his illusion of power, she moved silently. She forged new partnerships, redirected assets, and shifted control of joint ventures under her name. Legal documents were signed in quiet offices. Keys changed hands without anyone knowing. Each move was precise, careful, and deliberate. To the world, she remained invisible. Yet behind the curtain, the balance of power had already shifted. He was so busy looking outward, mocking her, that he never once looked beneath his own feet to see the ground disappearing. The trap was nearly closed, but no one could yet see the full scope. To his friends, he was still the man in control. To her, he was already caught, dangling in a web he didn't even know existed. Every lie he told, every laugh he enjoyed, every boast he shared, only tightened the net further. The audience of his life, his friends, his colleagues, watched the game unfold without knowing they were already part of her plan. Suspense thickened in the air, invisible but palpable, as if the moment of collapse could arrive at any second. Then came the night that would mark the end of his arrogance. He laughed at her across the room, his voice carrying with practiced cruelty, his girlfriend giggling on his arm. To him, it was just another performance, another chance to show the world she was nothing. What he didn't know was that every eye in that room was about to turn, not toward him as the victor, but as the fool. She stood quietly, calm and steady, holding the silence as if it belonged to her. The laugh that had once cut like a blade now rang hollow, for the trap had already snapped shut. The fall was seconds away, and he was the only one who didn't hear it coming. The night glittered with anticipation, a sea of faces waiting to witness his latest triumph. He moved through the crowd with practiced charm, a self-satisfied smile on his lips, certain that all eyes were on him. She entered quietly, measured, every step deliberate. No announcement, no grand entrance, just the steady confidence of someone who had waited patiently while he paraded his victories. He didn't notice her at first, too consumed by the image he had crafted of dominance and success. But she noticed him, cataloging his arrogance, watching the cracks he had never thought to mend, and understanding exactly how to pull the strings she had been arranging for months. As the evening unfolded, the spotlight shifted without warning. Conversations paused, laughter faltered, and whispers spread like wildfire as she approached the center of attention. Not with aggression, but with calm authority. It was subtle at first. A question asked in passing that revealed inconsistencies in his stories, a casual reference to events he had manipulated to his advantage, all carefully framed to draw attention without forcing it. The room began to notice the discrepancy between the man who boasted of his brilliance and the truth she carried quietly. His triumph, meant to solidify his power, became the stage for her revelation. She let the evidence speak with quiet precision. Screenshots, financial records, and documents carefully compiled over months lay within her reach, each piece revealing deception, theft, and arrogance in stark clarity. One by one, her words and facts dismantled the narrative he had built for public consumption. The proofs were undeniable, the timing perfect, and the audience helpless to turn away. In that moment, she wielded control with a calm so absolute it made his previous dominance seem fragile and laughable. The smirk that had once adorned his face, the same one he used to mock her, faltered and then vanished. He realized too late that every move he thought he had made to secure his victory had been anticipated. The game had never been his to win. She had orchestrated every step, let him overextend himself, and positioned herself to capitalize on every misstep. His confidence, once unshakable, crumbled under the weight of her silent strategy. The room, once filled with applause for him, fell into a hush. Every eye tracked the unraveling of his lies, the meticulous exposure of his deceit. He shifted uncomfortably, searching for allies, for validation, for anything that could restore the control he thought was absolute. But the truth had already taken root, leaving him stripped bare, his arrogance the very instrument of his downfall. He was powerless to stop the momentum of revelation she had initiated. Justice, poetic in its precision, unfolded without haste or anger. It was not luck or chance that undid him. It was the very arrogance and cruelty that had fueled his cruelty toward her. Every word he had spoken in mockery, every stolen credit, every casual humiliation now returned to him in a wave of inevitable consequence. The power he wielded so recklessly had been transformed into the instrument of his undoing, and she had never lifted a hand hastily. Her patience and strategy had been sufficient. When it was over, she spoke softly, her voice carrying the weight of triumph and restraint. He told me good luck without me. Turns out, I never needed luck, just patience. The room absorbed the words, the full measure of her quiet power, and the man who had once towered over her now sat diminished. An example of what happens when arrogance meets a mind that has learned to wait, watch, and strike with deliberate precision. She walked away calm, untouched by the chaos she had orchestrated, a victor in the truest sense, leaving a lasting impression that would never be forgotten. The man who once prided himself on control and charm now faced a reality he had never imagined. Friends who once laughed at her quietly began questioning his intentions, their loyalty wavering as whispers of his misdeeds spread. Business partners he had manipulated now withdrew their support, leaving him exposed and vulnerable. Every boast, every carefully constructed facade, collapsed under the weight of evidence she had meticulously gathered. Humiliation followed him like a shadow, his arrogance undone by the same precision he had never anticipated. Financial ruin gnawed at the foundations he had built, and the betrayal of those he considered allies left him stripped of both power and dignity. Through it all, she remained calm. There were no dramatic confrontations, no moments of public gloating. Her victories spoke for themselves, reverberating quietly but unmistakably through every corner of the world he had once tried to dominate. The contracts she had secured, the partnerships she had nurtured, and the leverage she had maintained became the silent testimony of her intelligence and patience. Every step of her plan had been executed with precision, and now the results resonated louder than any words of revenge could have. She had proven that true power did not need to shout. It merely endured, unwavering and inevitable. Her triumph was not born of anger. It was justice meticulously administered, a reckoning that had been a long time in the making. She had not sought to destroy him for spite, but to restore balance and claim the autonomy he had tried to steal. Each action had been calculated, each consequence deliberate, and the outcome undeniable. By the time he grasped the scope of his downfall, it was too late to plead, to manipulate, or to escape the repercussions of his own choices. The satisfaction she felt was quiet, precise, and profoundly complete, a testament to the power of strategy over impulsive retaliation. With the remnants of his influence gone, she stepped into a life defined solely by her own ambitions and vision. No longer tethered by his manipulations or overshadowed by his arrogance, she claimed her independence with unwavering confidence. Each decision, each accomplishment, bore the mark of her resilience and foresight. She moved forward untouchable, her path unburdened, every success a reminder that the game had always been hers to control. The freedom she had been denied was now a living reality, vibrant and undeniable in its strength. When she finally spoke, it was with the quiet authority that had defined her entire approach. He left me with nothing but a text. I left him with nothing but silence, and my silence was louder than his words. It was a closing statement, both profound and final, a testament to the patience, strategy, and composure that had turned betrayal into triumph. In that silence, the measure of her victory resonated more powerfully than any shouted accusation ever could, leaving a lasting echo of justice, resilience, and unshakable strength.